Most people imagine destruction as something loud, aggressive, and obvious. They imagine shouting, violence, visible hatred, or open betrayal. But some of the most dangerous people do not destroy your life with explosions. They destroy it with slow erosion. They weaken you little by little until one day you wake up and realize you no longer feel like yourself. This is the hidden danger of the covert narcissist. Their attacks are subtle. Their methods are quiet. Their damage is gradual. And because it happens slowly, many people never recognize what is happening until their emotional strength has already been drained. A covert narcissist rarely begins with cruelty. In the beginning, they often appear thoughtful, emotionally deep, caring, misunderstood, or even fragile. They know how to present themselves in ways that attract empathetic people. They study your compassion, your patience, your kindness, and your willingness to help others. Then they slowly begin shaping your emotional environment around control. Not obvious control, but psychological control. The kind that changes how you think, how you feel, and eventually how you see yourself. Their greatest strategy is emotional erosion. Erosion does not happen overnight. A rock is not destroyed by one drop of water. It is destroyed by constant pressure over time. In the same way, covert narcissists slowly chip away at your confidence, your peace, your clarity, and your identity through repeated emotional manipulation. At first, the criticism is subtle. They may disguise insults as jokes or advice. They may question your decisions in ways that sound innocent. They may compare you to others while pretending they are trying to help you improve. Over time, these comments begin planting seeds of self-doubt inside your mind. You start questioning your abilities. You become more cautious, more insecure, and more emotionally dependent on their approval. Then comes inconsistency. One day they praise you, the next day they withdraw emotionally. One moment they make you feel valuable, and the next moment they act cold, distant, or disappointed. This emotional unpredictability creates confusion. Human beings naturally seek stability, so you begin working harder to regain their approval. Without realizing it, you slowly become trapped in a cycle where your emotional peace depends on their changing moods. This is why covert narcissists are emotionally exhausting. You are constantly trying to understand them, fix problems, avoid conflict, and maintain harmony. But the truth is that confusion is part of the control. A confused person becomes easier to manipulate because they stop trusting their own judgment. Another dangerous form of emotional erosion is silent invalidation. The covert narcissist may not openly attack your dreams, but they quietly discourage them. They minimize your achievements. They act uninterested when you succeed. They redirect conversations back to themselves whenever you express excitement. Instead of celebrating your growth, they create emotional heaviness around it. Eventually, you begin shrinking your own light to avoid tension. This is how emotional erosion kills potential, not through direct destruction, but through discouragement. Many gifted people abandon their purpose not because they lack talent, but because they spent years around people who constantly weakened their spirit. The covert narcissist also uses guilt as a silent weapon. They make you feel responsible for their emotional state. If they are unhappy, you feel pressured to fix it. If they are offended, you feel guilty for protecting yourself. If you establish boundaries, they act wounded or misunderstood. Over time, you become emotionally conditioned to prioritize their comfort above your own well-being. This creates a dangerous pattern where you slowly lose connection with your own needs, desires, and identity. You stop asking yourself what brings you peace because your entire focus becomes managing someone else's emotions. That is not love. That is emotional captivity. What makes this situation even more painful is that outsiders often do not see the damage. Covert narcissists are usually careful about maintaining a positive public image. They may appear calm, humble, generous, or emotionally intelligent in front of others. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, they create environments filled with tension, manipulation, emotional neglect, and psychological pressure. This leaves the victim feeling isolated because nobody understands what they are experiencing. And here's the greatest tragedy of emotional erosion. It does not only affect your feelings, it affects your destiny. Emotionally drained people struggle to think clearly. They struggle to dream boldly. They struggle to trust themselves. Constant emotional pressure weakens creativity, confidence, motivation, and spiritual strength. Survival mode replaces vision. That is why awareness is so important. You cannot heal from what you refuse to recognize. The moment you understand that emotional erosion is intentional manipulation, you begin reclaiming your power. You stop blaming yourself for every conflict. You stop apologizing for having boundaries. You stop shrinking yourself to maintain toxic peace. Healing begins when you realize your emotional health matters. Your peace matters. Your confidence matters. Your voice matters. Healthy relationships do not slowly destroy your identity. Healthy relationships strengthen your growth, encourage your purpose, and create emotional safety. Never allow anyone to convince you that constant confusion, emotional exhaustion, and loss of self-worth are normal expressions of love. Real love does not suffocate your spirit. Real love does not require the destruction of your identity in order to survive. One of the greatest weapons a covert narcissist uses is confusion. They understand something that many people fail to recognize. A confused mind is easier to control than a confident one. So instead of attacking you openly, they slowly manipulate your thinking until you begin doubting yourself. This is why many victims of covert narcissism do not immediately realize they are being emotionally abused. There are no obvious bruises. There is no public war. The battle happens silently inside the mind. At the beginning, everything may appear normal. The covert narcissist may seem caring, emotionally intelligent, humble, or deeply sensitive. They often study your emotional needs before they begin manipulating you. They learn what makes you feel valued, what makes you insecure, and what causes emotional pain in your life. Then over time, they begin using that information strategically. One day they praise you, and the next day they criticize you indirectly. One moment they make you feel special, and the next moment they become cold, distant, or emotionally unavailable. They constantly shift their behavior in ways that leave you mentally unstable. You spend enormous amounts of energy trying to understand what changed, what you did wrong, or how to restore peace. But the truth is that confusion itself is often the objective. A healthy relationship creates emotional safety. You know where you stand. You know what is true. You know what is expected. But covert narcissism creates emotional instability. You are constantly analyzing conversations, replaying situations, and questioning your own interpretation of reality. This is psychological exhaustion. One of their most dangerous tactics is gaslighting. Gaslighting happens when someone manipulates you into doubting your memory, perception, or emotional experience. You may clearly remember what was said, but they deny it confidently. They may insult you and later claim you are too sensitive. They may break promises and later accuse you of expecting too much. Over time, you stop trusting your own judgment. Think about how dangerous that becomes. A person who no longer trusts their own mind becomes dependent on the manipulator for emotional direction. The covert narcissist wants to become the authority over your reality. They want you to believe their version of events instead of your own experience. Once that happens, your confidence begins to collapse. Many intelligent and compassionate people fall into this trap because they naturally try to understand others. Empathetic people often assume communication problems can be solved through patience, understanding, and love. But manipulation is different from misunderstanding. Manipulation is intentional confusion designed to gain emotional power. Covert narcissists also use guilt to distort your thinking. Whenever you express pain, they redirect the conversation toward themselves. Suddenly, your hurt becomes an attack against them. Your boundaries become selfish. Your honesty becomes cruel. Your emotional needs become too demanding. After enough repetition, you begin suppressing your feelings just to avoid conflict. This creates emotional self-betrayal. You stop speaking honestly. You stop expressing disappointment. You stop defending yourself. Eventually, you become emotionally disconnected from your own instincts. And when a person loses connection with their instincts, they lose protection. Another hidden tactic is selective kindness. Covert narcissists may occasionally become loving, supportive, or affectionate after periods of emotional harm. This creates emotional confusion because the victim clings to those moments of kindness and begins hoping the relationship will permanently improve. But inconsistent affection is often part of the control system. The uncertainty keeps people emotionally attached. Human beings naturally seek stability. So when someone alternates between emotional warmth and emotional pain, the brain becomes trapped in a cycle of seeking approval and relief. This is why many people struggle to leave manipulative relationships, even when they recognize the damage being done. You must understand something powerful. Clarity is a form of protection. When your thinking becomes clear, manipulation loses strength. The moment you stop excusing destructive behavior, you begin reclaiming your mental freedom. The moment you trust your instincts again, confusion begins to break. Healthy people do not constantly leave you questioning your worth, memory, intelligence, or emotional stability. Healthy communication may involve disagreement, but it does not involve psychological warfare. Real love does not require you to abandon your identity to maintain peace. This is why emotional education is so important. Many people are physically alive but mentally imprisoned by manipulation they do not fully understand. Awareness becomes the beginning of freedom. Once you recognize the patterns, you stop personalizing every attack. You begin seeing the manipulation for what it truly is. And here is the beautiful truth. Your mind can heal. Your confidence can return. Your emotional clarity can be restored. You can learn to trust yourself again. You can rebuild your identity after confusion tried to erase it. But healing requires honesty. You must stop minimizing behavior that continuously destroys your peace. Protect your mind carefully. Not every voice deserves access to your thoughts. Not every relationship deserves unlimited influence over your emotions. Your peace of mind is valuable, your clarity is valuable, and your emotional stability is valuable. Never allow someone else's dysfunction to convince you that your perception, your feelings, or your worth are meaningless. The day you stop doubting yourself and start recognizing manipulation clearly is the day you begin taking your power back. One of the most dangerous things a covert narcissist does is slowly destroy your identity without you realizing it is happening. They do not usually attack your confidence in obvious ways at the beginning. If they did, you would recognize the danger immediately and leave. Instead, they work gradually, carefully, and strategically. Their goal is not simply to hurt your feelings. Their goal is to disconnect you from your sense of worth, your inner confidence, your vision, and your belief in yourself. They understand that once a person loses confidence in their own identity, they become easier to control. In the beginning, they often admire your strengths. They compliment your intelligence, your kindness, your ambition, your creativity, your emotional depth, or your spiritual awareness. But over time, that admiration quietly turns into resentment. Your confidence becomes a threat to them because confident people are difficult to manipulate. A person who knows their value will question disrespect. A person who trusts themselves will notice contradictions. A person who is emotionally healthy cannot easily be controlled through guilt and fear. So the covert narcissist begins the slow process of weakening your self-perception. They do this through subtle criticism. Not enough to appear abusive, but enough to create insecurity. They may disguise insults as jokes, advice, concern, or honesty. They may say things like, "You're too sensitive, nobody else would deal with you. You always misunderstand things, or you think too highly of yourself." These statements may seem small individually, but repeated over months or years, they become psychological programming. The human mind is shaped by repetition. If someone constantly feeds you doubt, eventually you begin doubting yourself even when you were once confident. One of the hidden ways they attack identity is by minimizing your achievements. Whenever something good happens in your life, they struggle to celebrate it sincerely. Your success reminds them of their own insecurity. So instead of supporting your growth, they downplay it. You accomplish something meaningful and they respond with indifference. You share your dreams and they react with skepticism. You express excitement and they shift attention back to themselves. Slowly, your enthusiasm begins to disappear because every moment of joy becomes emotionally unsupported. Over time, you may notice that you no longer express yourself freely. You begin censoring your thoughts to avoid criticism. You stop sharing your goals because you are tired of negative reactions. You become cautious about your happiness because you fear emotional punishment. This is how identity erosion happens. You start shrinking your personality to survive emotionally. You become quieter, smaller, less expressive, and less confident than you once were. Covert narcissists also attack identity through emotional inconsistency. One day they praise you, the next day they withdraw affection. One moment they make you feel valuable, the next moment they ignore you or make you feel insignificant. This inconsistency creates emotional instability. You begin chasing approval instead of standing securely in your own worth. You become emotionally dependent on their validation because they trained you to seek reassurance from the very person creating the insecurity. This is extremely damaging because healthy confidence comes from internal stability, not external approval. But covert narcissists condition people to measure their value through unpredictable emotional rewards. It becomes an exhausting cycle. You work harder for acceptance, harder for peace, harder for validation, while losing more of yourself in the process. Another dangerous tactic is comparison. They compare you to other people in subtle ways designed to make you feel inadequate. They may praise someone else's appearance, intelligence, personality, or accomplishments in a way that indirectly attacks your self-esteem. The goal is not inspiration. The goal is insecurity. Insecure people become easier to dominate because they no longer believe they deserve better treatment. What makes this manipulation especially painful is that victims often blame themselves instead of recognizing the psychological attack. They think they are becoming weak, emotional, unstable, or overly sensitive, when in reality they have been living under constant emotional pressure. A person cannot continuously absorb negativity without eventually feeling its effects. The tragedy is that many people lose connection with who they truly are. Before the manipulation, they were full of ideas, confidence, passion, creativity, peace, and ambition. But after prolonged exposure to covert narcissistic behavior, they feel emotionally exhausted and disconnected from themselves. They no longer recognize the person they used to be. But this is the powerful truth. Identity can be restored. Confidence can be rebuilt. Self-worth can recover. The damage may be deep, but it is not permanent. Healing begins the moment you recognize that your value was never dependent on another person's opinion. Your worth did not decrease because someone refused to appreciate you. Your gifts did not disappear because someone felt threatened by them. You must learn to reconnect with your own voice again. Trust your instincts again. Honor your emotions again. Celebrate your growth again. Speak positively about yourself again. Build environments that strengthen your peace instead of destroying it. Protect your mind from people who constantly feed insecurity into your spirit. The covert narcissist wanted you to forget who you were because your true identity is powerful. A person who knows their purpose cannot easily be controlled. A person who understands their worth does not beg for validation. A person who is emotionally healthy becomes difficult to manipulate. And that is why reclaiming your identity is not just healing. It is freedom. One of the most dangerous things about covert narcissism is that it rarely looks dangerous in the beginning. If manipulation arrived wearing obvious cruelty, most people would immediately walk away. But covert narcissists understand something powerful about human nature. People are more easily controlled through emotional deception than open intimidation. That is why they disguise control as love, concern, sacrifice, loyalty, or victimhood. They understand that if they can make control appear caring, they can gain access to your trust without resistance. In the beginning, their behavior often feels comforting. They may appear deeply attentive to your emotions. They may speak softly, act wounded, or present themselves as someone who has been misunderstood their entire life. They know how to create emotional sympathy. And compassionate people are especially vulnerable because they naturally want to help, heal, and support others. The covert narcissist studies this kindness carefully. They recognize your empathy not as something to honor, but as something to use. At first, their control does not appear controlling. It appears protective. They may tell you they are worried about certain people around you. They may say they only want what is best for you. They may constantly question your decisions while pretending to care about your future. Slowly, your independence begins to shrink while their influence expands. They disguise domination as emotional closeness. This is why discernment is so important. Real love empowers people. Control weakens them. Healthy love inspires confidence. Manipulation creates anxiety. Genuine care respects individuality, but narcissistic control feels threatened by your freedom. When someone truly loves you, they do not need to reduce your identity to feel secure. But covert narcissists often feel emotionally unstable whenever you become stronger, wiser, or more independent because your growth threatens the power they secretly desire over you. One of their favorite weapons is guilt disguised as sacrifice. They constantly remind you of everything they have done for you, not because they genuinely gave from love, but because they expect emotional ownership in return. They may say things like, "After everything I've done for you," or "Nobody will ever care for you the way I do." These statements are designed to create emotional debt. They want you to feel obligated to tolerate mistreatment because they once showed kindness. But healthy relationships are not built on emotional slavery. True love does not keep score. It does not use generosity as a future weapon. It does not demand that you abandon your dignity in exchange for affection. Covert narcissists give strategically because they expect control in return. Their kindness often has hidden conditions attached to it. Another subtle tactic is playing the victim. Covert narcissists are experts at appearing helpless, misunderstood, rejected, or unfairly treated. They know that compassionate people instinctively move toward wounded individuals. But many times their victimhood becomes a shield against accountability. Anytime their behavior is questioned, they redirect attention back to their suffering. Instead of discussing the pain they caused, the conversation suddenly becomes about how hurt they feel. This creates emotional confusion. You begin conversations trying to address unhealthy behavior, but somehow you end up apologizing instead. Over time, you stop expressing your concerns because every conflict becomes emotionally exhausting. This is not healthy communication. This is emotional manipulation disguised as vulnerability. Many covert narcissists also disguise jealousy as concern. When you pursue your goals, they may subtly discourage you while pretending to protect you from disappointment. They may say things like, "I just don't want you to get hurt," or "I'm only being realistic." But underneath those statements is often fear of your expansion. Because the stronger you become, the harder you are to control. Understand this clearly. People who celebrate you only when you remain small do not truly support your growth. Real love celebrates your elevation. Real love does not compete with your potential. Real love is inspired by your success instead of threatened by it. Covert narcissists also disguise emotional dependency as deep connection. They may make you feel guilty for needing space, rest, or time alone. They may interpret your boundaries as rejection. Why? Because boundaries threaten access. Manipulative people become uncomfortable when they can no longer control your emotions freely. But boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are evidence of emotional maturity. They protect your peace, your identity, your mental clarity, and your purpose. A healthy person respects your limits even when they do not fully understand them. A covert narcissist often resents boundaries because boundaries expose unhealthy intentions. The tragedy is that many victims spend years believing they are being loved when they are actually being controlled. They confuse emotional intensity with emotional health. They mistake guilt for loyalty. They mistake fear for commitment. They mistake manipulation for compassion. And slowly they lose connection with themselves, trying to maintain connection with someone else. That is why self-awareness is essential. You must learn to examine relationships not only by words, but by results. Ask yourself, does this relationship strengthen my peace or destroy it? Does it increase my confidence or weaken it? Does it inspire growth or create fear? Does it respect my individuality or demand constant emotional surrender? Because anything that consistently crushes your spirit while calling itself love is not love at all. Real love does not require the death of your identity to survive. One of the most dangerous strategies covert narcissists use is isolation, because isolation weakens the human spirit without leaving visible evidence. Human beings were designed for connection, support, wisdom, and healthy relationships. We grow through encouragement, accountability, perspective, and love. But covert narcissists understand something very clearly. If they can separate you from healthy voices, they can gain greater influence over your mind, emotions, and decisions. Isolation is not always physical. Sometimes it is emotional, sometimes it is psychological. Sometimes it happens so slowly that you do not realize you are losing your support system until you already feel trapped and alone. At the beginning, the covert narcissist may appear deeply attached to you. They may tell you that nobody understands you the way they do. They may present themselves as your greatest supporter, your safest place, or the only person who truly cares about your feelings. This sounds comforting at first, especially if you are compassionate, loyal, or emotionally vulnerable. But over time, this attachment becomes unhealthy because it slowly turns into emotional dependency. The manipulation usually begins subtly. They may criticize your friends in indirect ways. They may question the intentions of people who genuinely love you. They may constantly point out flaws in your family members. They may create tension every time you spend time with other people. Eventually, you begin avoiding certain relationships simply to prevent conflict. You may not even notice it happening. What started as occasional criticism slowly becomes separation from the people who once gave you balance, wisdom, and emotional strength. This is important to understand because healthy people encourage your relationships with others. Healthy love does not fear your support system. Healthy love does not panic when you grow stronger, wiser, or more independent. But covert narcissists often feel threatened by people who help you think clearly. Why? Because clear-minded people become harder to manipulate. Isolation also creates emotional confusion. When you are disconnected from trustworthy voices, you begin relying more heavily on the narcissist's version of reality. Their opinions become louder because there are fewer healthy perspectives around you. Slowly, their manipulation begins shaping your identity. You start questioning yourself more often. You start doubting your instincts. You become emotionally dependent on approval from the same person, damaging your confidence. This is one of the most painful parts of manipulation. The person hurting you becomes the person you seek comfort from. That creates a dangerous cycle. They wound you emotionally, then position themselves as the solution to the pain they caused. Over time, this cycle drains your emotional strength and makes leaving the relationship feel impossible. Isolation also attacks your purpose. People who are emotionally trapped often stop pursuing their goals, dreams, and personal growth. Their energy becomes consumed by managing tension, avoiding conflict, and trying to maintain emotional stability. Instead of building their future, they spend their life surviving emotional chaos. This is why isolation is so destructive. It does not just affect relationships. It affects vision, productivity, confidence, creativity, and spiritual peace. Many people under covert narcissistic control become smaller versions of themselves. They stop speaking freely. They stop expressing opinions confidently. They stop trusting their judgment. They stop taking healthy risks. Their world becomes emotionally restricted because they are constantly trying to avoid criticism, guilt, silent treatment, or emotional punishment. You must recognize this truth. Isolation is not protection when it disconnects you from growth. Sometimes people think loyalty means cutting everyone off for one person. That is not loyalty. That is emotional imprisonment. True relationships expand your life. They do not shrink it. Healthy people inspire confidence, freedom, wisdom, peace, and growth. Manipulative people create fear, dependence, confusion, and exhaustion. This is why rebuilding healthy connections is a major part of healing. Healing does not happen completely in isolation. Wise relationships help restore perspective. Honest conversations help expose manipulation. Encouraging people remind you of your value when emotional abuse has damaged your confidence. Sometimes one truthful voice can break years of deception. You must also learn the courage to reconnect with yourself. Covert narcissists often isolate people from their own identity. You forget what you enjoy. You forget what inspires you. You forget your dreams because your emotional energy has been consumed by survival. Recovery requires rediscovering your individuality again. Spend time developing your mind, strengthening your confidence, and reconnecting with activities, goals, and environments that bring life back into your spirit. Most importantly, never feel guilty for protecting your peace. Some people will call your boundaries selfish because your freedom threatens their control. But protecting your emotional health is wisdom, not cruelty. You cannot continue sacrificing your mental stability to satisfy manipulative people. Your life was not designed to revolve around emotional captivity. You were created to grow, connect, build, create, and thrive. And the moment you recognize isolation as a weapon instead of love, you begin taking back your strength. The moment you stop allowing fear, guilt, or manipulation to disconnect you from healthy relationships, clarity begins returning to your life. Freedom begins when you realize that your voice matters, your peace matters, your purpose matters, and your future deserves to exist outside the control of emotionally destructive people. Healing begins the moment you stop normalizing what has been destroying you. Many people stay trapped in toxic relationships because they keep waiting for the manipulator to suddenly become honest, accountable, compassionate, or emotionally healthy. But recovery cannot begin while denial is still alive. Freedom starts when you finally recognize the truth of what has been happening to your mind, your emotions, your confidence, and your spirit. One of the greatest damages covert narcissists cause is psychological conditioning. They slowly train you to doubt yourself. At first, the manipulation seems small. You ignore subtle insults. You excuse disrespect. You overlook inconsistency. You explain away emotional neglect. But over time, the small wounds become deep internal fractures. Eventually, you begin living disconnected from your own instincts. You stop trusting your feelings. You stop speaking honestly. You stop expressing your needs because you have been conditioned to believe your emotions are always wrong, dramatic, selfish, or inconvenient. That is why recognition is powerful. Recognition breaks illusion. Once you clearly identify manipulation, you stop blaming yourself for another person's unhealthy behavior. You begin understanding that constant confusion was never normal love. Emotional exhaustion was never proof of loyalty. Fear was never peace. Anxiety was never intimacy. Walking on eggshells was never emotional safety. Awareness changes everything because clarity restores your ability to think independently again. And independent thinking is dangerous to manipulators. The moment you begin seeing patterns instead of isolated incidents, the emotional fog begins to lift. You stop chasing approval from someone who enjoys withholding it. You stop trying to earn love from someone committed to controlling you instead of respecting you. But recognition alone is not enough. Healing also requires boundaries. Many people fear boundaries because they confuse boundaries with rejection or cruelty. But boundaries are not punishment. Boundaries are protection. Boundaries teach people how you expect to be treated. Without boundaries, manipulative people will continue crossing emotional lines until your identity becomes almost unrecognizable. A covert narcissist often reacts negatively when boundaries appear because boundaries threaten control. The moment you say no, they may accuse you of becoming selfish, cold, prideful, disrespectful, or uncaring. Why? Because unhealthy people benefit when you remain emotionally accessible without limits. They become comfortable consuming your energy while giving little in return. You must understand this deeply. Every healthy relationship respects limits. Real love does not punish you for protecting your peace. Real love does not require you to abandon your mental health to keep another person comfortable. Real love values honesty, accountability, stability, and mutual respect. Manipulation, however, feeds on guilt and fear. Rebuilding yourself after emotional manipulation is a process of recovering your identity piece by piece. You may need to rediscover things you abandoned while surviving toxic environments. Some people stop pursuing their dreams. Some stop trusting their judgment. Some lost confidence in their appearance, intelligence, abilities, or purpose. Some became emotionally numb because constant stress drained their capacity for joy. Healing requires reconnecting with yourself again. Spend time understanding who you are outside of survival mode. Learn what genuinely brings you peace. Rebuild your confidence through discipline, growth, education, spiritual development, healthy relationships, and self-respect. The goal is not revenge against the narcissist. The goal is restoration of yourself. And restoration requires patience. Emotional wounds are invisible, but they are real. A person recovering from prolonged manipulation may experience fear, anxiety, emotional exhaustion, sadness, anger, hypervigilance, or self-doubt. This does not mean you are weak. It means your nervous system has endured prolonged emotional stress. Healing is not a straight line. Some days you feel powerful. Some days old fears return, but progress is still happening. One of the most important lessons in healing is learning to stop seeking closure from people committed to misunderstanding you. Many covert narcissists avoid accountability because accountability threatens the false image they work hard to protect. Waiting for complete honesty, apology, or validation from manipulative people can delay your recovery. Sometimes closure comes from acceptance, not explanation. You also need healthy voices around you. Isolation strengthens manipulation, but healthy community strengthens healing. Wise relationships remind you of reality when emotional trauma tries to distort your thinking. Encouragement matters. Truth matters. Safe environments matter. People heal faster where honesty, respect, peace, and emotional safety exist. Most importantly, reclaim your purpose. Toxic relationships often consume so much emotional energy that people forget their own potential. Your life is bigger than surviving manipulation. Your future is bigger than somebody else's insecurity. You still carry gifts, ideas, vision, intelligence, creativity, leadership, and purpose inside you. Do not allow painful experiences to convince you that your destiny ended because someone failed to value you correctly. The covert narcissist may have tried to weaken your confidence, silence your voice, and exhaust your spirit, but healing proves something powerful. Brokenness does not have to become your identity. Pain can teach wisdom. Boundaries can restore dignity. Clarity can restore strength. And once you fully reclaim ownership of your mind, your peace, and your purpose, you become far stronger than the version of yourself that once tolerated emotional destruction in silence.